Welcome to our It's Okay or this is not a podcast. This is a webcast. I'm getting confused with all our media formats now. I'm Kate Fisher. My team leads the It's Okay program at Cummins. And today we are talking about social media, and we are joined by Dr. Jacqueline Sperling, PhD. Dr. Sperling is the program director at the Clean Anxiety Mastery Program and assistant professor of psychology at Harvard Medical School. So, Dr. Sperling, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks. This is a big topic, and I want to start before we even get into questions or discussions about the magnitude of social media. And I think I know it as a social media user, but it wasn't until I started looking for some data to support it. And there are almost 5 billion active social media users around the world, which is 60% of the global population. And what is also stunning to me is that the average use of social media is about 2.5 hours. But if you pull it all together, I think I read that the world collectively spends 11.5 billion hours a day on, if you added it all up, that's how many hours we're spending on social media. And social media, I'm old enough to remember life before social media, but it's, and we know we're familiar, I think, with the Instagrams and the TikToks and Facebooks, but there are 35. I did not know. I think TikTok has over a billion users, but there are 35 platforms around the world that have over 100 million active users. So I wanted to put that out there for context because social media is not going anywhere. It's here to stay. And so I thought today that I think a lot of us have questions about how we can, and when I think back to the beginning of social media, right, there was a lot of excitement about how we were going to connect people. And I think there still is. So I'm hoping today that we can talk a little bit. We want to talk about the impact of social media on our well-being. And I think primarily it's mental, but it certainly affects. I said this last night to my husband and he laughed at me because I said, well, it certainly affects our financial well-being because I buy things that pop up on Instagram, right? Our social well-being, our physical well-being. So I want to talk a little bit about both sides of the coin today, but I thought I would start out with, why don't you tell us about, your experience as a clinician in helping people consider social media and their well-being?
Um, it- those numbers are staggering when you put them together. So thank you also for calling that information. Social media is not all bad. It's really depending on how you use it. And you highlighted something about connection, and it can offer a way to connect with people who are not close to you in geographical proximity in particular. It can be also a way to learn about new experiences in your community. So there could be restaurants or shops that advertise specials, and then that way you can then plan activities with friends and then go support your local community. It could also be a way to support charitable organizations that may post information there. So it's a way to connect directly with peers or family members, or you want to send messages or with other people in other affinity groups, as well as to support charitable organizations and your local community. All of those things can offer positive experiences. There has been research also to suggest that there can be a negative impact on one's mental health and also sleep, well-being, and that is when it's a particular type of use. And that, would you like me to go into those types of use
Yeah,
right now?
that's the
Okay.
thing. I think that, I wrote down like I randomly hear from people around the company and when they have concerns or I have conversations with people. And the things I wrote down that I hear the most about are sort of addiction, right? Addiction to that connection, comparison to things that might not exist, an increase in loneliness, despite it being social media. And then at some point, I'd like us to talk about too about how we protect our kids, because cyberbullying was the fourth one that I wrote down. So yeah, we'd love to hear it.
No, absolutely. Those are all really important points. And so thinking about the different types of use, so there are ones that are connected to the issues that you just discussed. So there is active versus passive, and there's self versus other-oriented types of use, and they can interact with each other. So for example, an active and self-oriented type of use might be updating your profile picture. That in and of itself is not necessarily associated with a negative impact on one's mental health. However, when you look at the other and passive oriented types of use, that would involve scrolling through one's news feed, that can create opportunities for comparison, right? And then that may facilitate or maybe associated with a negative impact on one's self-esteem or maybe on one's mood and maybe affect their sleep. Because also what we find is that it's that unpredictability that can make using social media so reinforcing or so more likely for you to use it again. So it's the fact that it is this intermittent or unpredictable schedule of reinforcement. If you just knew that, like, at this time of day, you were going to see this piece of information, that would be predictable. But you don't know how many likes your post or someone else's post is going to get. You don't know what someone else is going to post. You don't know when they're going to post it. You don't know what the comments are going to be. So all of that unpredictability is something that actually is very reinforcing and can activate the reward system of the brain. And neurotransmitter dopamine was associated with the reward system, right? Very reinforcing to keep you going. And when you're looking at things, a form of comparison, people are more likely to post some of their positive experiences, let's just say, or pictures that have been filtered. Some people may do that. And so when you're looking at your newsfeed, you may then compare your life, which you know all of the experiences of your life, to snippets of someone else's life that may also be filtered. And you may think, huh, like their life seems so much better than mine, or they're having so much fun out there. I'm not doing that activity. Or you may see examples of social exclusion. I wasn't invited to that party that's posted in that picture. You may also think that person got more likes than I did when we posted something similar, or someone didn't comment on my post, but they commented on their post. So there are all these opportunities for comparison that may be negative, that may negatively impact one's mood.
That's amazing. When you talk about the reinforcement, um, there's a lot of discussion, and I probably do this too. I'm sure that I notice it and I do it while I'm out. But there is this idea that we are addicted to our phones, right? So that's what I hear from people is, we're not as social media has made us less social because we're addicted to our phones. But I keep thinking, is it the phone or is it the social media? Because I had a phone before there was social media and I wasn't on my phone. There wasn't really anything that interesting to look at. So, this reinforcement, does it lead to addiction? Like, can you really be addicted to, I almost believe you can. I have actually gone through moments where I have downloaded an app that locks my phone so that I don't look at social media at before bed, or I can only look at it for certain hours of the day. I'm sure I'm not the only one. So how do and I have thought in some of the other data that I found that 71%, there was a research, Pew Research did some studies, and they said 71% of those who use social media agree they need to take a break from it, um, and that they're overwhelmed by the amount of information. So how do people deal with that? How do they start to, do you need to do something as severe as putting a lock on your, how do you um understand or recognize perhaps that social media is what is impacting so there's two questions there, really the addiction part, but then how do you I'm sure not everyone recognizes that maybe social media is what's leading to maybe feelings of negativity, sadness, depression. How do you address those?
All really good questions. I With the phone, there are also so many apps, whether it's social media or not, right, that send a lot of notifications. It could even be your email app that sends you a notification. And I think, again, right, that's an unpredictable schedule reinforcement, intermittent schedule reinforcement. If your phone buzzes every time that you get a new email or a notification or something, or it makes a noise, and then prompts you to check your phone, then that can keep you going and keep you checking your phone. So it may be all sorts of programs and not just social media that's pulling people to use their phones more often. A lot of people have like consolidated so much of their life on their phones, whether it's their calendar, their work emails, all their
Mm.
social connections, right? Their texting, their phone calls, so many things that are on their phone that may pull them to use it more. I agree with you. It is really interesting when you walk around town or if you're on public transportation, you will see most people looking down on their phones, at least the communities that I have visited. I have not visited every single community, but I can say many communities have been people looking down on their phones. And it's removing the opportunity to connect with people in your immediate surroundings. Being said, it is hard to pull away. Some people feel like, what if I miss something? Right? What if I'm needed for this? What if I don't, some people are like fear of missing out on an opportunity, right? Like I don't want to miss out if I'm invited to something. I want to respond to them, right? I don't want to be late to that. So there are all these sort of like this fear of like what's going to happen if I don't have it on me in that moment could also be something. If you start to notice it get in the way or stop you from doing things or like what you need to do, that can also be a signal, right? That it's like you are missing out on social plans, you're late to work because you're also using your phone, right? You're missing out on opportunities, you're staying in and not doing other activities that you need to do, not taking care of yourself. That can also be signs where like the phone use is being problematic. It's disrupting your sleep. You're waking up in the middle of the night to check your phone. Keep those things in mind. Is it interfering with your daily life? Can
Yeah,
be a red
I
flag.
think, yeah, and I think that, so, you know, on the, like I said, on the positive side of it, I think, we're obviously able to connect with people so much more. So, if I'm a user and I want to maintain some balance in staying connected with people, is there guidance that you give to the people who talk to you about this, about, it's like anything else. Do I limit my time? Should I give myself a set amount of time during the day to use social media? I know so many people in my own life who will say, I'm done. I'm done with social media. Or they'll say, I'm done with Facebook. I'm done with Instagram, but I'm going to but I'm still using Reddit, or I'm still using other platforms. I actually don't even, I know about four, but how do you differentiate between like what's good social media and what's bad social media?
Good question. Yes, I know there were the two parts of the question. So
Yeah,
the word addiction
yes,
wanted to get to this as well. So that's
yeah,
really important. I appreciate you circling back to that. I'm seeing is believing. I really think it's important to collect evidence for yourself. And so to think about like how is social media impacting you? And so what you can do is before you log on to a platform, rate your mood on a scale from 0 to 10. 10 being the most intensely you can experience an emotion, 0 not at all. So you may say, I'm a 6 happy, 3 worried, maybe 2 mad, irritated, however you're feeling. Be a range of feelings. And then pay attention to what platform you're using and what types of use in which you're engaging. Active versus passive, self versus other oriented, right? The interactions among all of those. And then afterward, re-rate your mood. And if you start to notice you are less happy, there's more anger you're experiencing, you're sadder, worried, then you might think like, huh, is there something about my social media use that's making me feel worse, right? What is it about that? And then you have some data. And then you may think like, well, now what? Right? It's like, well, I just don't use it because that may not feel practical, right? As you said, there are so many users on these platforms. It's such a pervasive experience in the world right now that so many people are using them and people also fear about missing out. So what you can do is make adjustments and then reassess. So what do I mean by that? So, for example, on Instagram, you can mute people's posts and stories. You can still remain connected to them as a connection. But if you find that, like, you know what, this person's post doesn't really make me feel good about that myself, and you can still remain connected with them, so that it's not like you're like, well, we're not connected on Instagram. You can send them direct messages. Maybe you just want to make it so that your newsfeed gives you updates on charitable organizations that are important to you, local organizations in your community, and maybe a news outlet, something like that, that are like, those are things about which you're passionate, want to make sure that they're on there. And then once you've curated your news feed, reassess, re-rate your mood before and after, and until you get to the point where you're at least not feeling worse after using
Yeah.
social media. So this will be an iterative process, and something will take more than just one assessment until you get to that point where it's not making you feel worse. Another strategy could be that you schedule plans that are in person or at least live over the phone, something like that, at a certain time so that it gets you off social media, right? If it's hard to stop yourself when you're just by yourself, it may be like, you know what, I'm going to schedule a phone date with a family member or friend at 7:30 p.m. So I'm going to have to get off that phone, or in some way, you're going back on the phone to talk, but you're getting off the
Right.
social media platforms. So those are some strategies. Use it to schedule plans in real life. I see a special at this restaurant. Then you send a direct message to a connection on social media. Hey, do you want to meet up at this day and time there? Get yourself out there so that you can use social media for a way and see if it enhances your mood, or at least
Yeah,
doesn't make you feel worse.
that's really interesting. And I think having, it sounds like self-awareness is really is so critical in this. And I just want to make a note to the everyone listening. Go ahead and use, as Megan said, the Q&A. We're going to talk for a little bit longer, and then we will get to everyone's questions in the second half of the session. But it sounds like self-awareness is really important. But what about when you have kids? Because I think the fear is, and I think about this in my own family, but you know, at what age is it appropriate for children to start to be engaged with social media? And then how do we think about protecting them, in their formative years? It's, from so many things that the issue of comparison, especially for, I think, women and girls, is really tough. And so, how there is concern about, online predators, and getting to children through social media. So, for the parents that are listening and they're concerned about social media and their children, what advice or guidance would you have for them?
It's a really important topic, and I'm glad that you asked. So it's a two-part, I would say, because in general, I would recommend that all families have a screen time plan that's not just about social media. Social media will be a component underneath it, depending on the age of your youth. But for all caregivers involved, to meet together and to come up with a plan as a united front, what they feel like is appropriate for their family as a screen time plan. And whenever you are presenting new information to your family, I encourage you to give a rationale. So I'll get to the social media aspect because I think it will be all encompassed in this. And that if you just say, because I said so, it's likely not going to go over so well. So you want to give a rationale. Why are you doing this? It is because you have learned it can be helpful for your physical and mental health, which I would argue are all your health, right? So that is helpful for your health, right? To have a screen time plan. And think about as caregivers, how do you want to implement this plan? And thinking about the ages of your youth in your household, because it will depend, right, in terms of what kind of access they have. And you can decide in a variety of different ways how you want to implement it. In the past, the American Academy of Pediatrics used to say no more than 2 hours of recreational screen use each day. And this is when, like, once you're above a certain age, because babies are not have access to screens. And when I say recreational screen use, recognizing that a lot of students now have their work online or on computers. So this is more like recreational, like watching a TV show, playing a video game, watching something on an iPad, things like that, using their phones. And now they're saying it's not just the focus on time. It's really making sure that screen use doesn't replace your everyday activities. So it's not happening before you do your homework. It's not happening before you take care of your body. It's not happening before you exercise. It's not happening before you socialize. So all of those things, your chores, if all of those things happen, then you may decide as a family, then you may have access, right, to recreational screen use. You may also combine it and say, like, I want there also to be a time limit. Another key thing to present to them to say, like, it will be important that screen use stops in an hour before bed would be ideal. And again, here's where the rationale comes in. And this goes for all ages, by the way. I appreciate it, hard to do for those, maybe like the phone may be the last thing you see before you go to bed, and it is important to disconnect at least an hour before if you can. If that feels really hard, then I encourage you to try maybe a half hour, see if you can work your way up to an hour. Why am I telling you this? Because your brains naturally secrete melatonin. It's not just sold at CVS or pharmacy. Your brains naturally secrete melatonin and it helps you fall asleep. However, anything with the screen, that blue light sends a message to your brain that says, hey, stop making melatonin. It's time to be awake. And also, you're using the screen, your brain's also running and operating, right? So then you're engaging your brain and keeping it awake. Especially also if you're doing it while you're in bed, then your brain is making an association. I should be awake here when you are on your phone. So it'll be really important that you disconnect and have your youth disconnect from screens an hour before bed. Have them do things to wind down, hot shower, wash their face, brush their teeth, read outside of their bed in a cozy nook so that they're not awake doing something in their bed. Again, this is for sleep hygiene because you're giving them the rationale, right? What is the reason for their health? So you want to make sure that they turn in screens an hour before bed. That could also be a way that they earn access to screens. And again, I'm going to get to the social media piece in a second. Notice how I said earn, though. This will be a key language piece for your household I encourage you to use. It is very common for you to hear parents say, well, you lose TV time, you lose your phone, I'm taking it away, right? That kind of language suggests that those devices are givens. And many youth do think they're like an appendage, right? They are an unalienable right. They are a given, but they are not. And they are privileged. As a parent, you're required to give food, clothing, and shelter, and anything above and beyond that is a privilege. So think about ways of how in your screen time plan, how they will earn access to screens, right? And that can also go in terms of like the access to social media. Now, so again, you're going to come up with this information and I would get really specific. What kind of access do they have on weekdays, weekend days, vacation days where you travel, staycation days, sick days, public transportation, doctor appointments? What is the plan? Sleepovers when you go to their house and they come to your house? All of these different opportunities, holidays, right? When you're like, wow, there are like a lot of different days maybe I'm not thinking of. You want to think of every single plan for as much as you can so that you are not confronted by a child like, hey, can I use screen time? What's the plan for this day? And you haven't thought through a plan. So you want to have all the components there. You want to present it when your children are relatively calm, fed,
Yeah.
not in response to them asking you for screen time, and to come up with a plan for how you want to implement this. It will be very important, screen time, I promise, and the social media is coming shortly. It will be very important also that you practice what you preach and you
Mhm.
model this plan. If you want your kids to adhere to this plan, they're much more likely to do so if you do it. So if you don't want them to be on their phones at the dinner table, it's going to be important that you are not on your phones at the dinner table. And if you want them to limit their recreational screen use time, it's going to be important that you do the same. Now, I get that you may need to use your phone to enroll a child in extracurricular activity. That's not your recreational screen use time, right? That's more for logistical business purposes, right? To set your child up for an activity. This is more for like if you're also scrolling and looking at your newsfeed or online shopping or something that's entertaining for you, that's where you want to model a similar plan. Okay. Now, getting to the last thing I was just say is that when you present this plan, it's not up for negotiation. You as
Mm.
caregivers may decide to adjust it as you see fit. You're like, okay, I didn't think about that part, going to adjust this, but not because your child, teen has worn you down. You want to make sure that you have a plan in place and that they see that this is the plan, right? And
Yeah.
again, it's for their health, right? Now, the social media piece. What do you do with that? So the reason I hear me sigh is that like unfortunately there's not this like straightforward recommendation. This is the best age for them to start. What I would say is, and it's for families to decide. First, they're not supposed to, at least until they're 13 in terms of legally, but then I mean, although I just saw that Florida's now passed a law that it may be now 16 for some youth there. So depending on your state, um, or it really will be a family decision. Otherwise, you decide like at what age do I think it's appropriate for my teen to have access to social media? And I would say the later, the better for multiple reasons. So as late as you're willing to allow that kind of access, they said for multiple reasons. Why? The brain actually doesn't fully develop until later in your 20s. And the last part of the brain to develop is a part of these frontal lobes. What's going on there? Well, when your child goes through adolescence and their teenage years, it's like they're revamping that car that they have. They get these accelerators, the gas pedals, before they get the brakes. And so that impulse control does not come on until later and it's not fully developed. So you have youth with low impulse control and they've got the gas pedals. So they'd be more likely to, maybe more likely to post something and not think through before they post it. And what are the long-term consequences? Also, in terms of abstract thought, also doesn't come until later. Abstract thought, why might that be relevant? Well, a day feels like 10 years in a teen's life, right? Or a week, right? But they're not really thinking through like, do I want that post hanging out there like 30 years from
Yeah.
now when I may be in a different developmental state and not really wanting that information out there? They may not be thinking that through. That's a really abstract thought. That's a permanent digital fingerprint for them. So then, well, how do you handle this? We'll talk about also how parents can be involved in this way. So again, the later, the better. The other reason I was going to say is this comparison aspect. Kids going through puberty, they go through puberty at different rates. Typically not a comfortable time for youth. Not, everybody's at different rates. They're looking at other people's bodies. How is my body compared to someone else's? And then when they're online and then they're seeing all these different forms of opportunities for comparison and people may be using filters, it can distort their perception of what a typical body may look like, and can, particularly research has shown for those who identify as girls, and the younger they are, they start and it can more negatively affect their self-esteem and body image. So keeping in mind, right, that the younger they start, their breaks aren't there, the abstract thought isn't there, they're going through puberty, their opportunities for comparison, their bodies are not fully developed. And so keeping that all in mind also as well in junior high, it is and it's not fully all or nothing bifurcated. And I don't want to say that gender is binary because it's all on a spectrum, but what research has shown that, like, for example, that for those who may identify as boys may be more likely to engage in physical aggression, whereas those may identify as a girl may are more likely to engage in relational aggression. What do I mean by that? Well, that can be social exclusion, spreading rumors, the cyberbullying, things like that, where it's like, if some of you were calling back time back in seventh grade. I've
Yeah.
never really met someone who's like, gosh, those were the good old days. I would really like to go back there, right? It's usually a time where you might remember like you were friends with someone in 1 minute and then the next minute you were not. Or if you have youth who are in that age range, the social circles change very quickly. And so now with social media and text, there's so many opportunities, right, for that relational aggression to get amplified with a megaphone.
Yeah,
So
right. Yeah, and those are all things. Those are the types of things I think that we hear the most from. So it sounds like, the later that we can defer the our children getting onto social media and even engaging with it is probably it sounds like the best. And I didn't realize that the human brain doesn't fully develop until you're in your 20s, which probably explains a lot. So
that information came later. So they added on
yes,
the developmental stage, emerging adulthood. I do have more
right.
information, but I don't want to interrupt if you want to know think about some other steps that parents can take with social
Yes,
media.
we
Would
would
that be
love to hear
helpful?
them. Yes.
Um, so thinking about this, if you're going to allow your youth to have access to social media, what I might suggest is establishing a plan and letting them know ahead of time. This can also happen when they have access to texting, is to say that like, look, like just so you know, at the end of the day or whatever frequency that you think would be appropriate for your family and a fit for you, we'll go over your posts and your accounts together. And this is not for a way for me to hover over you. This is really for a chance for, that this is a new experience for you, right? And to learn more about, like, ask questions. I wouldn't be like, what in the world were you thinking posting that? I would get curious, be like, what inspired you to post that? Or what did you think when this person posted this? Ask open-ended questions. If your youth think that they're going to be judged, they likely are going to be likely going to shut down and not engage with you. So be curious. This can give you opportunities to help see if they're believing perhaps some misinformation, see how they're interpreting certain posts there, see how it may be impacting their mood at all. That could also cue you to have this open dialogue, right? And when I was talking about that abstract thought, this can help because, as I said, the kids are like, well, like, like a day feels so far away, let alone for me to think about, like, oh, well, how do I feel about this decades from now that this is still online in a permanent digital fingerprint? However, they are likely to recognize how it might make them feel if their parents are going to see what they post. So, right, they're supposed to really think about, like, if I post this, am I comfortable with it being on a billboard? And if I'm okay with it being on a billboard, then it's okay to post it. That's a really abstract thought. If I'm okay with my parents seeing this, then I will post it, right? Because that's what's going to happen. So I encourage you in the beginning. As they get older, you may pull back on that, but this is really to establish that trust. And as they are learning with those gas pedals and not the brakes, to have your assistance, which open-ended, curious questions that are supportive, you can engage in conversations and help them learn, right? Not a shaming way, help them learn. There may be times, right, it's going to be bumpy for them. They may have had some negative experiences or post something that they regret in a way that's non-shaming. Be like, you're still learning, right? Let's think about ways you can learn from this from the future, right?
Right.
So review with them at the end, right? A screen time plan of how they earn it. You may also make a decision that they have to ask your permission to follow someone that they don't know directly. So if it's a famous person, you may want to screen their posts, see if they are appropriate for your child to see. And so that is something you want, whether it's a
I love
different
that
person
idea.
depending on.
I think that's amazing because I am surprised sometimes, even without famous people, just people who will randomly try to connect with you online. And it's, as a child, if I had children, I would be very concerned about that. So I like that rule a lot.
You mentioned the
Um,
safety there too, right? I think important to
yes,
teach them about safety as well.
you teach them about safety. We taught kids not to get in, we teach kids don't go with somebody physically who approaches you, but this is a whole nother world that somebody is still able to approach you and perhaps get you to go with them eventually. So Dr. Sperling, I know we have some questions in the Q&A, and Megan, I don't know if you want to hit those questions or you want me to. I'm happy to, but I want to make sure that some people who have asked questions, we have the ability to go through those questions.
I'd be happy to do that. I'm not sure if this is one of them. One piece just to say, there may be a question about what do you do if your youth says, like, what if, like, the fear of missing out? I'm not sure if it is one of
Yeah.
them. I was going to address that, and then I will not derail
Let's
your
talk about
question
that
answering that.
because FOMO is a real thing. I
It's
mean,
a-
I yesterday my husband said you always want to be where you're not, and I was like, oh yeah, that's
It does not
true. And I think
discriminate with age. It's not just for
yes,
kids, right? It's for adults too. It can
yes.
have, you
So
can
I am very
experience
eager to
it.
hear about this.
And so
Yes.
when I would, when you're having this conversation about what your plan is, you may hear youth be like, but what about, like, if they're only allowed to be on screens between 7 and 9, I'm just making up a time frame, for example, right? It's like, but what if my friend asks me for plans or group chat and it's like before 7 or if it's after 9 and I miss them, right? So you want to make sure you have this conversation beforehand and to say, like, look, I don't want to make sure that you miss out on anything. You can feel free to give them my number, that, or if you have a landline, they can call the house phone, right, to ask you directly for plans. I would also let them know when you're available so they know when they're going to get a response from you. And a good friend will find a way to connect with you when you're available. That's
Yeah.
also very key. They're like, well, they won't wait for me. And it's like a good friend will. And also, this experience is not new. If you rewind before social media came out, teens have been throwing their parents under the bus for decades, right? my parents are strict. They won't let me do that or go there, right? And their friends found a way to connect with them in a way that was allowed by their friends' parents, right? So this is just to be like, well, my parents only let me have access between these 2 hours. Friends find a way. So anyway, I just wanted to put that out there
Yeah,
because
no,
that's likely a comment you'll get.
that's a great reminder. So Megan, I don't know, do you want to take over the questions?
Yep, yep, for sure. So we've got lots of good questions, and these probably will bring out good discussion as well. So, first question we have is, do you believe social media, along with people working from home during COVID, has led to people having horrible manners or social behaviors?
Mm. I mean, I don't want to say that there's a causation. I could see, I have seen it, particularly with working with youth, right? Because they have spent so much time communicating electronically with shorthand, emojis, that when it comes time, they get to have age like draft an email or communicate with someone directly, even or make a phone call, they don't know how. And it's because like the lack of practice. And I think because, right in the pandemic, they were not doing that themselves often, right? They were drawing from social connections there, purposely to keep themselves physically safe. And also, if you're doing things electronically and sending short text messages, you're not getting that practice of how to send a more formal email or to make a phone call, communicate with someone live. And so I think that is something, it's not something that they've gotten worse, but maybe for some people not even had that exposure or learned how. And so some people may be rusty, but some people may just not have gotten that experience and may benefit from learning that.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Next question we have is, overall, does social media actually impact people positively? It feels as if there are far more negative impacts than positive. So I know we touched just a little bit about maybe some positivity around social media, but can we just highlight maybe those things that you've seen that are positive?
Oh, sure. I think like for people who connect with affinity groups can make them feel less alone, right? For people who are caregivers or, whether it's a parent or caregiver for an elderly parent, there's sometimes, a Facebook group where they can get, support options from or ideas or like, oh, have you tried this? So it can be, a productive way, or then they then befriend them and meet in person if they live nearby or have phone calls. So it can be a way of expanding one's community. I've seen that, right? Or if a friend moves away, it can be a way where people can send direct, messages or share experiences through a direct conversation and strengthen that relationship. So, and it's not all bad, but I think that it's really the type of use in which you engage that might be that can depend that will either negatively affect your mood or not.
It's interesting you say that because I keep thinking about the self-awareness part, that what social media has forced us to do is be more self-aware about how we engage with it, because there are like the question that was just asked. And I also noticed that there was a question. So Megan, I'm butting in a little bit. There was a question in here that was asked that said, if you're missing out on things due to social media, will you be aware, or do you need someone, to tell you? And I guess that was kind of the question I have, is that, what are, if there are people on this call, right? And I think we all think we're very self-aware, but are there questions we should like, and you touched on them a little bit when we talked about addiction, but how are you, how do you really start to identify that you're missing out on things because you're over here too much, you're over here in this virtual world too much?
Maybe, if you're someone where, I mean, our lives are so busy right now. People are often on autopilot, going from one thing to the next, and busy, maybe multitasking as well. And so it may be hard to keep track or really have some perspective to take a step back and be like, how often am I using something, right? Or missing out on something. So it could also be maybe like keep a log, like, oh, you know what? I decided to stay home and scroll on social media instead of go out to dinner with my friends. Or I decided, you know what? I had a meeting at work, but I was actually scrolling through my news feed and it wasn't like super engaged. I missed what my boss said for a few minutes, and but take note of that, right? Just like keep track of like how many times you're doing that. And if you start to notice like that list is getting longer or it's already interfering with some things, then you have some data. So if it's hard to catch yourself in that moment, maybe create a framework for you to find a way to increase self-awareness.
Yeah, do you think that there's also a way on the flip side of that? If you, let's say there's somebody that you're close to and you notice, like my husband and I will do this. We did it at dinner last night and we try to have like no phones at the table. And like he'll say, oh, hang on, I'm gonna look up the weather, how, like, if there's somebody that you think it's a problem, how do you approach it with that person, similar to when you were talking about approaching it with your children, in a way that invites a discussion about it instead of putting somebody on the
Like
defense?
defensiveness. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, a couple of different ways you might be able to approach this. If it's the kind of thing where you yourself are saying, you know what, I have a feeling like this is going to be hard for me to do, or I'm not necessarily aware. So, like, if you catch me using it, maybe when I'm not supposed to use it, maybe find like a non-shaming buzzword to be like bing or something like that, where like you're like, oh right, okay, gotta put my phone down, right? So it's in a supportive, collaborative way, to help, make change. However, if like someone has not invited you to do that and you're noticing that they really are spending a lot of time on their phone and they're not as connected with whether it's a partner, other family members, or work or anything like that, I suggest leading with concern. Right. And just going in, just be like, describe it you've noticed first without judgment. Like, describe things that are facts that they can't discount, right? If you just say, like, you're addicted to your phone, like, that's debatable, right? For them to be like, no, I'm not, to be like, I've noticed at the dinner table, you bring your phone to the dinner table, or I've noticed at meetings, you're on your phone, right? So just say, I've noticed this and just wanted to check in with you to see, like, I'm wondering, like, how you've been doing. Like, it seems like it's been happening more often, and how that's, just lead with concern, describe what you've been noticing. If you're worried about someone because they're missing out, some just be like,
Oh, somehow we've got,
that's me to me.
okay.
I just like, I'm worried. Silence a person who's worried. No, do not silence a person who's worried. Like, I'm worried about you, right? And it's just, so you're describing, you're not judging, and then you're letting them that you're worried about, showing that you care versus like you're shaming them that they're doing something wrong.
Okay,
And
that's
then
great. Yeah.
you can also offer to be of help too if they want it.
To help identify those moments. Yeah. Where they could put it down. Yeah, I think it's very helpful, and I think being very aware of it, is helpful. I don't know if it wasn't for the fact that I have a husband who's not a big social media user, if I would, and he points it out to me more often, it is very helpful to know that. So in that experience, but Megan, I know we have more questions, and I interrupted and threw you off track, so sorry about that.
No, that was a great discussion and addressed another question. So here, another question we have is, has there been any studies of long-term effects of using social media? I often think seeing the negativity affects people socially, emotionally, as well as physically.
There has been some research that has followed youth for, they'll follow them over time. And some of them have been cross-sectional. Maybe it's not like the same youth, but they're looking at people over different sections of years there and have found some long-term negative associations. But again, really thinking about it's the type of use in which people will engage. And I think that's where they were also finding, just in terms of like the age at which someone starts. So I'm talking about for those who identify as a girl, and the younger the age that they start, more likely to have a negative impact on their self-esteem and body image later on as well. And they were also looking at certain ages too, because like for those who identify as males, it was like in the later teens for them, that was a trickier time for them. So there has been some research to suggest that. And again, it's not all types of use. You want to think about the different types of use in which you're engaging with social media. There also has been some research, now it wasn't longitudinal, but it's not just youth in terms of who are have been negatively impacted. There's research too for those who were in their, I believe they were in their 50s. They were researching them and found that, and it was an association, it wasn't a causation, but in terms of those who had increased use of certain social media apps, rated higher levels of depression symptoms. They compared things before and after. So after using the apps, they found that.
Wow.
Here's another question. It kind of goes in a little bit of a different way, but it says, what about social media viewed as an income generator? Does this have an impact on influencers, quote unquote, mental health in any way?
I cannot speak for them. And, I think, for the people, like, yes, in some ways you may see like a positive, benefit, right? That's their livelihood. And for some people do feel pressure, but I've heard like anecdotally when I've spoken to them, that pressure to, well, I have to post this, right? Or I need to get this many followers, or I didn't get that many likes on this, or like, what if I don't get another commercial, another thing to promote, like, will I not have money or income? So I think it can definitely increase stress, for some. I don't want to say it's across the board for everyone. It may depend on the person, but just thinking about like if that's your livelihood depends on that, like how many followers you have, or you feel compelled, like I have to post a certain number of times in order to get paid by the apps, which is actually a thing. Just your frequency with which you post and the number of followers can determine how much you get paid. So that can
Yeah,
also
but
increase the
do you
pressure.
think that, and here I go again, Megan, but is there a direct, connection between our self-esteem and or or how do you have people approach self-esteem that is so driven by social media? When I think about the things that I based my esteem on, say in 1995, right, versus now, when there is just a constant stream of comparators, how do you tell how do you tell people to approach disengaging? Like, how can you disengage your self-esteem? And I'm thinking social that influencers have to fall prey to this because of your esteem is based on your likes, the number of likes, the number of followers. How do you sort of disengage yourself and understand that your esteem cannot be driven by this form of media?
It's really tough because I think, there are a lot of people who feel like, oh, if I just get this many likes, I'll be happier, right? Or that means like I'm well liked, right? And I think oftentimes when people get to that point, they don't experience that. And then they feel like maybe I just need more. And then that keeps
Yeah.
pulling them to do more and more and more and more. And it doesn't fill that void because it's often like it's superficial reinforcement in some ways, right? Where people are not getting the deep connections if it's just a brief post or a like here and there. Right. In terms of that's very different than making yourself vulnerable with someone else and someone else makes themselves vulnerable with you and you get to know them and you strengthen that friendship or connection relationship over time. That can also help boost your self-esteem. Like, oh, I was a supportive friend, if that was something that you value, right? Like I was there for someone, or
Yeah.
someone wanted to spend time with me outside, of social media and wanted to spend time, like that can help boost self-esteem, right? You're helpful, someone seeks support from you, they want to spend time with you. Thinking about like, oh, but I got this many likes on a post, you may find that like that's not necessarily filling that void of like feeling whether you're like loved and accepted or helpful, things like that, where people, if that's those are their values.
Great. Thank you. Megan?
Yes. Next question is, what about pressures of social media in the workplace? Like, for example, LinkedIn and usage of as a networking tool.
I think, if you are looking for a new job, I mean, if you have an intent, like there may be times where you maybe feel pulled to use social media a little bit more often to reach out to people, maybe for direct contacts and things like that. Again, I might think about using that self-assessment with what's motivating you to post, what kind of posts are you making, and what types of use are you engaging, in terms of these social media apps, and how does it make you feel afterward? Some people feel like they may feel compelled to announce maybe professional accomplishments, multiple things over and over again, and like, what's the motivation there, right? Are some people seeking to fill a void that has not been filled in other ways, and then they find that that's actually not actually serving them, but then they feel then they have to keep chasing that more, then maybe that's not a helpful avenue. Or if it's like further industry that helps a job recruiter see them, and then but then they stop, and once they get the job that they need, then maybe that's a way that it's serving you. So you're thinking about the purpose.
Great.
And this is a good question. So it says, has reading a book before sleep the same effect than using the phone?
Oh, I mean, you mean like on a Kindle or just like a hard, and maybe they didn't specify, but
Yeah,
I,
that is
I
that would be interesting details. Like, is that the same or on kind of both areas of a hardback or a physical book versus
I
Kindle.
did mention not in the bed. I think I wonder if that may be to what they're referring. So I do suggest, like, if you're going to read before bed, so that can be a great activity before bed to wind down. Maybe if you have like a little reading nook or just leaning against the bed, like on the floor, just in a, against a pillow or something like that, because your brain is an expert at making patterns and doing anything that isn't sleeping. And if you are an adult, right, then are being intimate in the bed, right, their youth, that's not their job there, then your brain will make an association to be awake in that place. So for sleep hygiene, you want to do things that are just really focus on sleep or otherwise intimacy, because it'll make it harder to fall asleep.
Yeah. Next question is, have there been any studies focusing on or finding different effects based on public-facing social medias versus walled-off social media, such as private Facebook groups, Discord, etc.?
I have not seen, I'm not saying it doesn't exist. I've not seen the literature just in terms of comparing the two. I think in terms of if we're thinking about the negative associations with mental health and sleep, that was with the passive and other oriented types of use. So I would think that that would be more inclined where it's more open, right, versus closed in opportunities.
Yes. Here's so next question is, or a question that's coming up is, I believe the anonymity of social media, so hiding behind a screen, has emboldened folks to be bullies. What is the best way to explain this to our children or other adults honestly and prepare them for these folks? So yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's a great question. We have this discussion all the time. I want to add to that question. Do you believe that people by being anonymous, I mean, is that the part that's turning people, somebody asked the question earlier, if maybe because of COVID, people have become, I don't know what the right word is, jerkier, I guess, over time. I think we all feel that, but how does this anonymity play into it?
It's a good question. So I think it's also in terms of like people would probably be less likely to say things to your face than they may be able to. They feel more, less less inhibited through when they have a device in their hands because they're not getting your immediate emotional reaction right in front of your face. You're physically there, right? Ghosting. Ghosting is also a thing, right? Like you want to just like stonewall someone and right when they're standing right then and there, but because you have a device and you're not getting someone's direct feedback to you, maybe perhaps you may be more inclined to do that. Same thing with saying perhaps, a comment filled with anger that may be discriminatory or accusatory online, you may be more likely to do that through a screen. Now, how do you help someone who's learning how to use social media and navigate that? And similar with, how you would help them navigate an in-person bully too, right? Is to teach them, right, that you want to have them actively ignore. And it may be that they feel like they're doing nothing, but they are actively ignoring. Now, whether it's in person, it's no eye contact, no talking, no touching, nothing engaging. Because if you think about a bully, what they want is the rise out of you. And if they don't get attention from you, then they're not getting what they want. Now, I'm not comparing a bully or another human to an animal, or also not comparing an animal to a bully. But if you think about if you've got a dog that comes to your dinner table, and if you never give it food, it eventually is going to be like, well, this is a useless waste, of energy. I'm not coming here. If you give it food one time, though, it's going to come back and it's going to keep coming back and asking for more. So think about that with attention. Now, if a bully's ever physically harming someone, or also if there's something you can also report something online. It's not to say that just let it go, but you do not engage with that person to keep it going and to have youth like if they see something, have them come to you. And so that's again when you're having this open conversation, be like, someone said this, what do I do? And make sure that they know that they're not to engage. That's likely not going to go into a productive space.
That's great. Megan, I think those are all the questions that were on there.
Yeah, I just want to follow up a couple of them, just are kind of maybe some statements around different scenarios of, LinkedIn can be as addictive as others, and then a story about a family member that was had addiction or proposed addiction to his phone. How do you find your self-help? And what are some ways that you say, I either see a family member, we talked a little bit about having that conversation. How do you find help for either yourself or others if you feel like the social media has gotten to an unhealthy place?
Oh, in terms of like if you want to seek therapy, in terms of that kind of
Yeah.
help, like beyond there's a self-assessment.
Yeah.
Well, I say this, and I also want to recognize that we have a very large problem, particularly in the US, in terms of access to mental health services, because the need and the number of providers is not commensurate there. And if you are concerned and you're looking and you want support, at least to get on a wait list if someone's not immediately available, you know, a pediatrician for your child, your internist can also be a first person to ask if they may have referrals in the community. Another thing that you can do is some organizations have lists of providers who are trained in certain specialties. So if you're someone who's experiencing, for example, anxiety or depression, the Anxiety and Depression Association of America, ADAA, you can go on adaa.org and there's a list of providers who are trained there. Right? The Beck Institute also has a list of cognitive behavioral therapy providers. So there are different ways where you can find providers. Some people go on Psychology Today. I just would encourage you to think about like for what are you looking, and make sure that someone lists like not too many specialties, kind of thinking about it from a medical perspective. Like you wouldn't go to a doctor who says that he is a cardiologist, a radiologist, an anesthesiologist, you know, and a surgeon, right? You want to, you know, someone who really specializes in something and they can go in depth that meet your needs there.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And then Kate, do you want to talk about any resources we have here at Cummins?
Yeah, and so you know, we have listeners who participate from, you know, around the world. We have EAPs, employee assistance programs, in just about every area of the world for Cummins, and all of them provide a number of free resources. So I just want to remind everybody that you have access to an EAP. You know, so when you're not sure where to start, sometimes that is the best place to start. And I tell people all the time, sometimes you might engage with a therapist and it's not the right fit at first. Don't give up. There are multiple sessions available, and start there. Sometimes people will engage with a therapist versus a coach, so that we have coaching available with many of our EAPs. You know, anywhere you are. So I would say that's generally what the guidance I would give people as a first step. Alyssa has posted in the chat access to the It's Okay website, where there are tons of resources posted as well. So Dr. Sperling, thank you so much. I know there is so much interest and so many questions in this topic. So
thank you for having me.
You have really met a need, I think, that we had. So I thank you for joining us today.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and thank you everyone for your thoughtful questions, and thank you for the facilitation, Kate and Megan and everyone.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks everyone else for joining. Have a good day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.